Imagine two little girls, dressed neatly and seated in first class, clutching their boarding passes with pride. They should have been savoring warm meals and juice like everyone else around them. Instead, they were handed nothing but stale crackers, denied even a glass of water, and told loudly that they didn't belong. Now imagine the youngest, just 8 years old, breaking down in tears. Instead of comfort, a flight attendant's hand gripped her small shoulder, ordering her to stop crying. Can you picture the silence that fell across the cabin? Can you feel the outrage simmering in the hearts of passengers forced to watch? But here's the twist. These weren't just any passengers. These were the daughters of a man whose name carried the power to bring an entire airline to its knees. And when he picked up the phone, justice began moving at 30,000 feet. What happens when cruelty collides with innocence? When arrogance meets the wrong family? And when truth is recorded for the world to see? The answer will shock you. Before we dive into this unforgettable story, hit that like button, share this video with others, and subscribe to our channel. Let's begin. The cabin of Flight 762 hummed with the steady thrum of engines and the soft chime of glassware. First class always had its own quiet theater, the polished trays, the silver utensils, the hushed conversations that never rose above the low roar of altitude. Yet amid this polished calm, one sound pierced the stillness, a child's muffled sob. 8-year-old Amara Reed pressed her stuffed rabbit against her chest, tears sliding down her cheeks. She tried to swallow her cries, tried to make herself invisible, but the fear and hunger were too heavy for her small body to hold. Standing above her was Catherine Doyle, the senior flight attendant in charge of the cabin. Catherine's uniform was pressed to perfection, her hair pinned in a tight bun that gave her an air of authority. But her expression, sharp and cold, carried none of the warmth passengers expected from someone in her role. "You need to keep quiet right now," Catherine hissed, her voice low enough to sound private but loud enough for several passengers nearby to hear. Her hand clamped down on Amara's small shoulder, fingers digging through the fabric of the child's dress. "You're not the first person to be hungry on a plane, and you won't be the last." This crying stops immediately. Naomi Reed, 12 years old and already carrying herself with a protective air beyond her years, leaned closer to her sister. Her heart pounded so loudly she swore the passengers around them could hear it. She wanted to say something, anything, to shield Amara, but her throat locked. In the seats around them, the polished calm of first class fractured. The elderly man in 1C shifted uneasily in his seat, glancing from his untouched dessert to the scene unfolding just a row behind him. The couple in 3D exchanged looks of disbelief, their conversation evaporating into the charged silence. Amara's sobs grew quieter, but not because she wasn't crying. The little girl's body trembled as she forced the sounds inward, her tears spilling silently down her cheeks. She turned her face toward the oval window, hoping the bright white blur of clouds would distract her from the sting in her shoulder and the ache in her belly. Catherine stood for another moment, her grip firm, her jaw set, as if she believed she was teaching a lesson. Then she straightened, smoothed her uniform jacket, and gave a tight smile that convinced no one. Without another word, she wheeled her service cart down the aisle, her heels clicking on the carpet with a rhythm that sounded more like judgment than professionalism. The cabin settled into a tense quiet. The hum of engines filled the silence that no one dared to break. Passengers exchanged glances but said nothing, each caught between outrage and hesitation. They had all seen enough flights to know how precarious it felt to challenge authority at 30,000 feet. Naomi exhaled slowly, her hand still wrapped around Amara's. She leaned close to her sister's ear. "It's okay," she whispered, though she didn't believe her own words. Her mind churned. Why us? What did we do wrong? Why would an adult treat us like this? She thought about their father, Marcus Reed, always reminding them to be polite, to carry themselves with dignity no matter the circumstance. She remembered his words, respect yourself even when others don't, especially when others don't. Naomi wanted to hold on to that lesson now, but it felt slippery, like trying to clutch water in her palms. Amara sniffled and whispered, "Did I do something bad?" Naomi shook her head quickly. "No, Amara, you didn't do anything wrong. Not one thing." Her voice cracked despite her effort to sound steady. The businessman across the aisle pressed his lips into a thin line, his fork frozen above his plate. The woman beside him clutched her necklace, her eyes narrowing at Catherine's back as the attendant moved farther down the cabin. For the rest of the passengers, this was the kind of moment that stayed lodged in the chest long after the plane touched down. They had just witnessed something ugly in a place meant to feel rarefied, something that cracked the sheen of first class wide open and exposed the raw unfairness inside. But this moment, Catherine's hand pressing into Amara's shoulder, the hissed command to stop crying, was not where the story began. It was only the breaking point of something that had been building since the food service started an hour earlier. Back then, the scent of rosemary roasted salmon and garlic butter steak had drifted through the cabin. Trays lined with porcelain plates, the clink of wine glasses, the practiced smiles of attendants. Every passenger had been attended to, their preferences indulged, their comfort ensured. Every passenger except for two young black girls seated in 2A and 2B. Naomi remembered that moment vividly, because it was the first time she realized that being invisible could hurt worse than being seen. She remembered Amara's small face peering hopefully at the approaching cart, the sparkle of expectation in her sister's eyes. She remembered how that sparkle dimmed, one skipped row at a time. Now, sitting in her seat with her sister's tears dampening her sleeve. Naomi felt her chest swell with a strange mix of fear and determination. She was only 12, but something inside her was already calculating, already searching for the next move. Do I speak up again? Will anyone listen if I do? Or will it make things worse for Amara? Her mind shifted to their father again. Marcus Reed wasn't just their dad. He was the man who built Aero Vista Airways from nothing, who believed dignity in the sky was a right, not a luxury. He had faced discrimination himself, stories Naomi only half understood, but she knew they had carved deep lines into his determination. What would he say if he were here now? Would he stand up, his voice calm but firm, and remind the crew that his daughters were human beings deserving the same respect as everyone else? Would he gather the eyes of the cabin and turn silence into solidarity? Naomi squeezed her sister's hand tighter. She wasn't her father, but she wanted to be brave like him. The trouble was, bravery felt dangerous at 30,000 feet. With Catherine Doyle patrolling the aisle and passengers frozen in their polite shock. The engines roared a little louder as the plane sliced through a patch of turbulence. The seatbelt sign dinged. Amara flinched at the sound and buried her face deeper into her sister's arm. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, summoning every ounce of resolve she had. Something inside her whispered that this was not over. This was not the end of the story. And it wasn't. Because what led to Catherine Doyle putting her hands on an innocent child wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a chain of choices, laced with prejudice, that had been unfolding quietly, meal by meal, glance by glance, until it burst into the open in a single cruel grip. This was only the beginning. The memory of the meal service came back to Naomi like a sharp replay. It had started so normally, so innocently, with the polished choreography of first-class dining. Passengers reclined comfortably as the flight attendants wheeled out the shining carts. The scent of roasted garlic, caramelized onions, and seared steak filled the air. Even the hum of the engines seemed to quiet when the aromas drifted through the cabin, as though the entire plane paused for this ritual of elegance. Naomi had seen first-class meals before. Their father, Marcus Reed, had taken them on a handful of flights for family trips. He always reminded them that they should treat everyone on board with respect, whether in first class or coach, because flying was not just about luxury, but about dignity. Naomi knew what to expect here: porcelain plates, warm bread wrapped in linen, and servers who spoke in gentle tones that made each passenger feel important. That was the way it started. Catherine Doyle came down the aisle with a practiced smile. To the man in 1A, she leaned in warmly. "Would you prefer the grilled salmon tonight, sir, or the medallions of beef?" She laughed lightly at his small joke, refilling his glass of wine before he even asked. To the elderly woman in 1B, she spoke with such care, gently confirming whether she could handle dairy in her meal and adjusting accordingly. Row by row, the service continued like a performance, each plate presented with pride, each passenger treated as though their preferences were sacred. Then came 2A and 2B. Naomi and Amara sat side by side, watching the cart draw closer. Amara clutched her stuffed rabbit, her stomach growling so loudly that Naomi heard it even above the hum of the engines. The little girl's eyes brightened at the sight of the covered dishes and the faint glimmer of dessert plates stacked at the edge of the cart. She whispered, "Do you think they'll have the chocolate cake Daddy told us about?" Naomi smiled faintly. "I'm sure they will." But Catherine's hands never slowed as the cart reached their row. Her eyes never met theirs. With the efficiency of muscle memory, she pushed the cart right past them, her smile reserved for the businessman in 2C, as though the girls in 2A and 2B did not exist at all. Naomi's head turned, confused. Amara's hopeful expression wavered. She looked down at her lap, then back at the cart disappearing toward the next row. The moment felt like an oversight, but the sting in Naomi's chest told her it wasn't. Catherine returned a few minutes later, now offering bread rolls and salads. Again, she skipped 2A and 2B, setting the basket down first in 2C with a cheerful, "Fresh rolls." "Sir?" Naomi's throat tightened. She raised her hand slightly, her voice steady but soft. "Excuse me," she said. "We haven't received our meals yet." Catherine's head snapped around. Her smile faltered into something harder, a mask slipping just slightly. She glanced down at the girls as though they were an interruption. "Let me see what we have available," she said, her tone clipped, impatient. She dug into the cart with exaggerated movements, pushing aside the elegant plates, the silverware, the neatly stacked desserts. After a moment, she pulled out 2 small cardboard boxes, the kind passengers usually found in the economy cabin. She placed them onto the tray table between Naomi and Amara with a loud thud. "Here," Catherine said, her voice carrying through the cabin, "crackers and cheese. This is what we have for passengers in your situation. Passengers in your situation." The words landed like a slap. Naomi froze, heat rising in her cheeks. Amara stared at the small snack box, then at the porcelain plates filled with steak and vegetables on either side of her. She whispered to her sister, "But we're in first class." Naomi placed a hand on Amara's knee under the tray. "I know," she whispered back. "It's okay." but her chest felt like it was burning. Across the aisle. The businessman in 2C paused mid-bite, glancing sideways at the children. He opened his mouth as though to say something, then closed it again, his lips pressed tightly together. The elderly woman in 1B had stopped eating altogether. She watched the scene unfold with wide, troubled eyes. Catherine leaned back slightly, her professional mask gone. "Listen, honey," she said, her voice loud enough to ensure everyone nearby could hear. "Some people think they deserve special treatment just because someone bought them fancy tickets. But this airline has policies, and I follow those policies exactly." Her eyes scanned the cabin, as if inviting the other passengers to agree with her. "This is what's appropriate for passengers like you. You should be grateful you're getting anything at all." Amara's face crumpled, her small lips trembling. She tried to hold the tears in, but they came anyway, quiet sobs that she pressed into the fur of her stuffed rabbit. She whispered through hiccuping breaths, "Why doesn't she like us? Naomi, what did we do wrong?" Naomi swallowed hard, her throat so tight she could barely speak. She brushed a strand of hair from her sister's forehead and whispered, "Nothing. Amara, you didn't do anything." Around them, the atmosphere shifted. Polished luxury no longer covered the raw tension in the air. Forks paused. Conversations faltered, and the hum of the engines filled the silence that words refused to bridge. Catherine, however, did not stop. She continued down the aisle, smiling at the couple in 3A, adjusting their children's meals, making sure allergies were accommodated. She poured wine for the parents, offered extra cookies to the children. To everyone else, she was the perfect hostess. But to Naomi and Amara, she had been something else entirely. Naomi stared at the snack box still unopened on the tray. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but pride kept her hands away. She glanced at her sister, whose small fingers trembled as she tried to peel back the plastic seal. Naomi reached over, stopping her gently. "Wait," she whispered. "Let's see if she comes back." But Catherine didn't. By the time she returned with the dessert tray, offering slices of chocolate cake topped with fresh berries, Amara's hope was gone. She stared at the plates as they passed, the sweet scent of cocoa and cream so close she could almost taste it. When Catherine set a plate down in front of 2C with a cheerful, "Here you are." "Sir?" Amara turned her face toward the window. Her voice was barely audible, but Naomi heard it. "I'm so hungry." Naomi's chest ached. She reached into her small backpack, where she had packed snacks for emergencies. She pulled out a crinkled package of crackers. The sight of Amara tearing into the stale snack, eating gratefully with tears still on her cheeks, broke something in Naomi's heart. It broke something in others, too. Evelyn Carter, seated in 3A, pulled her phone from her purse. She had been watching quietly, her stomach knotting tighter with every slight, every insult. Now, seeing the two children eating their own meager crackers while surrounded by gourmet plates, she could no longer sit silent. She angled her phone carefully, the red recording dot glowing as she captured everything. The businessman in 2C shook his head in disgust. The elderly woman in 1B pressed a tissue to her eyes. Passengers whispered among themselves, but Catherine stood taller, convinced she had done her duty. She smoothed her uniform, lips pursed with self-satisfaction. To her, this had been a lesson delivered, order maintained. She had no idea what consequences she had just set in motion. And Naomi, sitting with her sister's head against her arm, felt a deep shift inside her. She was only 12, But she knew this was bigger than her, bigger than Amara. Something told her their father's voice would soon echo across this plain, even if he wasn't here yet, because this wasn't just about a skipped meal. This was about dignity. And Naomi understood, with a clarity beyond her years, that dignity denied to one was dignity threatened for all. The air in the first-class cabin had grown heavy, like a storm gathering above the wings. The hum of the engine seemed louder now, filling the silence left behind by words that had cut deeper than any turbulence ever could. Amara sat still, her small hands clutched tightly around the edges of the cracker package, her stuffed rabbit resting against her lap. Naomi sat beside her, frozen between fury and fear, her 12-year-old heart beating hard in her chest. When Catherine Doyle returned to their row a second time, her heels clicking softly on the carpeted aisle, Naomi hoped maybe this time she would set things right. Maybe the attendant had realized her mistake. Maybe she would offer an apology. Maybe she would give them the meals everyone else had received. But Catherine had no intention of correcting herself. She stopped beside their seats, adjusted her posture, and spoke in a voice that carried down the aisle, clear enough for every passenger to hear. "Listen, honey," she said. Her eyes locked on Naomi, though her words were meant for both sisters. Some people think they deserve special treatment just because someone bought them a first-class ticket. But on this airline, we have rules, and I don't make exceptions. Naomi felt her stomach twist. She looked around at the other passengers, hoping someone might speak up, but their faces were a mix of discomfort and disbelief. No one moved. Catherine leaned in slightly, lowering her tone to something more biting. "This is what's appropriate for passengers like you," she continued. "You should be grateful you're getting anything at all." The words hung in the air like smoke. Amara blinked, confusion clouding her innocent face. She whispered to her sister, her voice trembling. "Why doesn't she like us? Did we do something wrong?" Naomi swallowed, fighting back the sting of tears. She wanted to shout, to defend them both, to tell Catherine she was wrong. But the weight of the cabin pressed down on her. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "No, Amara, we didn't do anything wrong." Catherine straightened, brushing imaginary lint from her jacket, then turned her attention to the passengers in 2C. "Is everything to your satisfaction, sir?" she asked brightly, her smile snapping back into place as though nothing had happened. The man nodded stiffly, clearly unsettled, but unwilling to confront her. He picked up his fork and stabbed at his food without a word. Naomi clenched her fists in her lap. A battle raged inside her. One part of her wanted to stay quiet, to avoid making things worse, to let the moment pass. Another part, stronger and louder, urged her to act, to stand up for Amara, to prove that they were not invisible. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Dignity is something no one can take from you unless you let them." But how was a 12-year-old supposed to defend dignity against a grown woman in uniform? Her chest tightened as Catherine continued down the aisle, smiling at other passengers, refilling drinks, laughing at small talk. The contrast was unbearable. To everyone else she was gracious, professional, attentive. To Naomi and Amara, she was a wall of cruelty. The injustice burned like fire. The meal service wound down. Plates were cleared, coffee poured, small chocolates offered on delicate trays. Amara watched it all silently, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. Naomi wrapped her arm around her sister's shoulders, holding her close. The crackers sat half-eaten between them, their sharp saltiness a poor substitute for the meals they should have been given. The cabin settled into a fragile quiet. but it was broken by a small, shaky voice. Amara lifted her eyes to Catherine as she passed with the empty tray. "Please, ma'am," she said softly, almost pleading. "Could I have some water? I'm really thirsty." Catherine stopped, her cart squeaking slightly in the aisle. She looked down at the child with eyes that held no kindness. "Water service was 30 minutes ago," she said coldly. "You should have paid attention." Amara's lower lip quivered. Tears brimmed again in her eyes. She looked to her sister as though asking for permission to cry. Naomi squeezed her hand and whispered, "It's okay. Amara, don't worry." But the knot in her stomach grew tighter. This time, though, the silence didn't last. From 3A, a woman's voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me," said Evelyn Carter, her voice steady but firm. She set her glass of wine down and turned fully toward Catherine. "These children clearly have first-class tickets. Why are they not receiving the same service as the rest of us, heads turned?" The businessman in 2C looked up quickly, relief flickering across his face as though someone had finally spoken the words he had been too afraid to say. Catherine stiffened, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Ma'am," she replied, her voice clipped, "I am a professional flight attendant with 15 years of experience. I know exactly how to do my job. These passengers are receiving the service they're entitled to." Evelyn raised her brows. Her gaze shifted deliberately to the children clutching a half-empty packet of crackers. "Really?" she asked, her tone heavy with disbelief. "Because what I'm seeing doesn't look like equal service to me." Catherine's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned her cart sharply and moved away, muttering something under her breath. The tension didn't fade. If anything, it grew sharper, tighter, as though the cabin itself was holding its breath. Naomi sat frozen, her heart racing. Someone had spoken up for them. For the first time since the cart had rolled past, she felt a flicker of hope. Still, the shame lingered. She could feel the stares of other passengers, the weight of their silence. She wondered why more of them didn't say something. Were they afraid of being labeled disruptive? Were they hoping it would all blow over? Or was it easier to look away? Amara leaned closer to her sister, whispering through quiet sobs, "I'm really hungry, Naomi, and I'm thirsty." Naomi pulled her closer. "I know," she whispered. "We'll be okay." But even as she said it, her mind churned. She thought of her father again. If he were here, things would be different. He wouldn't let this go on. He would make sure everyone in this cabin remembered that every passenger mattered. But he wasn't here. It was just her and Amara, two children against the weight of authority. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the service concluded. Some passengers reclined, closing their eyes. Others pulled out laptops or books, trying to return to normalcy. But for Naomi, normal had vanished. The injustice clung to her like static, buzzing in her chest, refusing to let go. She reached into her backpack again, pulling out another small package of snacks she had saved. She offered them to Amara, who accepted gratefully, chewing silently as more tears slid down her cheeks. Around them, the remnants of gourmet meals sat on polished trays, crumbs of chocolate cake dusting porcelain plates, half-finished glasses of wine glimmering under the cabin lights. The contrast was unbearable, and yet Catherine still moved through the aisle with confidence, as though she had proven her point, as though her behavior had been justified. She seemed almost proud of herself, her posture straighter, her step sharper. Naomi's jaw tightened. Her hand shook slightly as she reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing the edge of her phone. She hesitated. She was 12. What power did she have against someone like Catherine Doyle? But then she looked at her sister. Small, tired, hungry, holding on to a stuffed rabbit for comfort, and Naomi felt something rise inside her, something stronger than fear. She didn't know what she would do yet, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't over. Naomi sat stiff in her seat, her fingers tightening around the edge of the armrest as the atmosphere in the cabin grew heavier. Evelyn Carter's words still echoed in the air like a challenge no one could ignore. For a moment, Naomi felt a flicker of hope, but Catherine's cold dismissal smothered it. The senior flight attendant glided back toward the galley with her tray, her head held high, her lips pressed in the kind of self-satisfaction that came from believing she had silenced opposition. To Catherine, this wasn't cruelty. This was control. She believed she had asserted her authority over the cabin, over the children she had marked as lesser, and over the passengers too hesitant to intervene further. Naomi stared at the unopened snack box on her tray, her stomach clenched, but she could not bring herself to eat it. Accepting that food felt like accepting the insult. Instead, she looked at her sister. Amara's small body slumped against her side, her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her chin. The little girl's eyes were swollen from crying, her lips dry from thirst. But still she whispered, "Do you think Daddy would be mad if we told him what happened?" The question twisted inside Naomi like a blade. Their father had always told them to speak up when they saw injustice, but he had also taught them to choose their battles wisely. Naomi didn't know if this was a battle she could fight. She was just 12. She wasn't sure her voice would matter here. But Amara's question revealed the deeper truth. Silence wasn't an option anymore. Not for her, not for her sister. Around them, passengers whispered to one another. Naomi heard snippets, fragments of disbelief. Never seen anything like it. Their children. Outrageous. The businessman in 2C shifted uncomfortably in his seat, staring at the tray in front of him as if his untouched cake might give him courage. The elderly woman in 1B dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her shoulders trembling. Catherine returned once more, her cart rattling as she collected plates. Her smile had grown brittle, her tone sharper. She moved with brisk efficiency, praising some passengers for their patience, joking with others, while intentionally ignoring the sisters in 2A and 2B. When she leaned across Naomi's row, her words dripped with condescension. "Well, it looks like we've run out of food," she said loudly, ensuring her announcement reached beyond their seats. Her eyes locked on Naomi and Amara, her tone feigning regret. "I guess I forgot about you two during service. That's what happens when you don't speak up at the right time." The cabin fell silent. Naomi felt the heat of humiliation rise to her cheeks. Amara's head dropped, her small shoulders trembling. She pulled the stuffed rabbit closer to her chest, as though it could protect her from the cruelty raining down on her. Naomi wanted to scream. She wanted to tell Catherine that children shouldn't have to beg for food, that no passenger should be treated like this, that this entire cabin knew the truth. But her voice caught in her throat. She stared at the woman towering above them, her words caught in a knot of fear and outrage. Amara broke the silence with a sob that pierced the cabin. She whispered through her tears, "I'm so hungry." The sound of it shattered something deep in Naomi's chest. She reached into her backpack again, her trembling fingers pulling out the last package of crackers she had packed. She opened it quietly and handed it to her sister. Amara ate slowly, each bite of the stale crackers mixing with her tears. The sight was unbearable. Evelyn Carter, still holding her phone at a low angle, captured the moment with steady hands. The businessman in 2C shook his head and muttered under his breath. The elderly woman in 1B looked as though she might cry again, but Catherine felt no shame. She stood taller, convinced she had shown these children their place. She mistook the silence of the passengers for submission. She didn't notice the way Evelyn's phone caught her every move, or how other passengers were now quietly raising their phones too. Naomi's heart pounded. She tried to steady her breathing, tried to keep her voice calm for her sister's sake. "It's okay, Amara," she whispered, brushing a tear from her cheek. "We'll be fine." But even as she said it, Naomi's mind swirled with questions. Should she call their father? Would he even believe her? Would he be angry that she hadn't handled it on her own? Or would he be furious that someone had dared to treat his daughters this way? She imagined his voice, calm but commanding. The voice he used in boardrooms when he wanted the entire room to know he would not tolerate disrespect. He would not have stayed silent. He would have demanded justice. And Naomi realized then that silence was no longer an option. Catherine returned one last time, preparing to lock the cart for descent. Her eyes flicked to the girls, then away again, as though they were no more than luggage. She began speaking loudly, her tone dripping with false authority. "I hope this little experience has taught you both something about how to behave on an airplane," she announced, her words sharp enough for passengers in the back rows to hear. "Flying is a privilege, not a right, and part of that privilege is knowing your place." Naomi's chest burned. She looked at her sister, who stared at Catherine with tear-streaked cheeks, her small body trembling. Then she looked around the cabin, at the faces of the passengers who had witnessed it all. Their silence had been heavy, but their eyes told another story. They were waiting. Finally, it was Naomi who spoke. Her voice shook at first, but then steadied. "We weren't being bad," she said. Her words directed at Catherine, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "We said please and thank you. We didn't yell. We didn't make demands. We didn't do anything wrong." The cabin grew even quieter, the hum of the engines, the only sound. Amara looked up at her sister, her eyes wide with a fragile mix of hope and fear. Catherine's jaw tightened. Her voice rose, sharp with condescension. "Young lady, the fact that you think you were being good is exactly the problem. Good passengers don't cry when they don't get their way. Good passengers don't take time away from the crew. Good passengers follow rules without making demands." Naomi opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, another voice rang out from across the cabin. "I've been watching these children the entire flight," said a woman from row 4A. She stood, her presence commanding. "And they've been better behaved than most adults I've ever flown with. What I've seen from you, however, has been cruel, inappropriate, and completely unprofessional." Gas rippled through the cabin. The woman stepped into the aisle, her voice unwavering. "I'm Dr. Laura Martinez. I'm a pediatrician. I know what it looks like when children misbehave, and I know what it looks like when children are unfairly targeted. These girls are the most respectful passengers on this plane, and what you've done to them is nothing short of abuse." Catherine's face flushed a deep crimson. She turned sharply, her voice trembling with anger. "Ma'am, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I think I know the difference between respect and entitlement. These children," but she was cut off again. A man in row 5 stood, adjusting his glasses. "And I'm a civil rights attorney," he said firmly. "And what I've seen is discrimination, plain and simple. I've documented every detail. If you think you're protected by your uniform, you're mistaken." The cabin erupted into murmurs, passengers nodding, whispering, some even clapping softly. Catherine's authority was unraveling before her eyes. Naomi clutched her sister's hand tightly. For the first time since the meal service began, she felt a glimmer of something stronger than humiliation. She felt the spark of justice. And though she didn't yet know how, Naomi understood with absolute certainty that the truth would not stay hidden. Naomi's hand shook as she reached for her backpack. The cabin around her was still buzzing with murmurs, the echoes of Dr. Martinez's sharp words and Robert Fields's declaration hanging heavy in the air. Catherine Doyle had retreated to the galley, her posture stiff, her face tight with anger, but the damage to her authority was visible. The passengers no longer looked at her with quiet submission. They looked at her with suspicion, even contempt. Naomi sat still, her heart pounding so hard it made her chest ache. She looked at her sister, whose head rested against her arm. Amara's eyes fluttered shut, though Naomi could tell she wasn't asleep. She was too hungry, too scared, too overwhelmed to rest. Naomi brushed a strand of hair away from her sister's face and whispered softly, "I've got you." For 12 years, Naomi had lived in the balance between being a child herself and being the older sister Amara needed. Her father often told her she had an old soul, that she carried herself with a strength beyond her years. Tonight, on this plane, she felt the full weight of that responsibility. She could not let Amara suffer alone. Her fingers slipped into the side pocket of her backpack until they brushed the cool edge of her phone. She hesitated, frozen in the moment. Should she do it? Should she make the call? Her father had always told them to handle small problems on their own, to speak with respect, but also with confidence when they felt overlooked. He wanted his daughters to grow up knowing their voices mattered. But this was not a small problem. This was cruelty. This was humiliation. This was a flight attendant using her power to make 2 children feel worthless. Naomi's chest tightened. She imagined her father's voice, calm, commanding, reassuring. He would know what to do. He would protect them, even from hundreds of miles away. Her thumb hovered over his name. She took a slow breath, then pressed the call button. The line rang once, twice. On the 3rd ring, his warm voice answered. Sweetheart Marcus Reed's tone carried the casual ease of a man finishing his day. But as soon as Naomi spoke, everything changed. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling, "we need help." The words cracked something inside her. For the first time since the ordeal began, tears filled her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. She turned slightly toward the window, shielding the phone with her hand, trying to keep her voice low so Catherine wouldn't notice. Her father's tone shifted instantly. The warmth was gone, replaced by sharp concern. "Naomi, what's happening? Are you and Amara safe?" Naomi glanced at her sister, who stirred at the mention of her name, then nodded weakly as if he could see her. "We're on the plane. Flight 227 to New York. The flight attendant. She's being really horrible to us. She didn't give us food. She gave us only crackers. And when Amara started crying, she grabbed her shoulder. She told her to stop crying. Daddy, she hurt her." Her father's silence was heavy. Naomi could hear his breath on the other end, slow but sharp. She could almost see his jaw tightening, his eyes narrowing. She put her hands on Amara. His voice was low, deadly calm in a way Naomi had never heard before. "Yes," Naomi whispered. Her hands shook as she clutched the phone tighter. And she said, "We don't belong here. Everyone else got salmon and steak, but she gave us crackers. She said we should be grateful. Daddy, we didn't do anything wrong." For a moment, the only sound was the steady roar of the engines outside the window. Then Marcus spoke again, his voice like steel. "Listen to me carefully. Naomi, you did nothing wrong. Not one thing. You and your sister are perfect passengers. Do you hear me?" "Yes, Daddy," she whispered, her tears falling faster. "I need you to stay calm," Marcus continued, his voice steady and strong. "Keep holding your sister close. Do not speak to that flight attendant again. Do not engage her. Help is coming." Naomi blinked. "Help? But how?" "Daddy, we're 30,000 feet in the air." "Don't worry about that, baby girl," Marcus said firmly. "That's my job. Just remember this. You are not alone. Not for 1 second." Naomi closed her eyes, letting the words sink into her bones. She had always known her father was powerful. He built companies, led boardrooms, shaped policies. But in this moment, he was simply her dad. And the conviction in his voice gave her a strength she didn't know she still had. What Naomi didn't know was that her father's office was already springing into action. At that exact moment, Marcus Reed was standing at the head of a long mahogany table in a Manhattan skyscraper, where his evening board meeting had been winding down. Around him sat executives, advisors, and lawyers from his aviation empire. When his daughter's call came through, he had excused himself briefly, but now he returned to the table with a new fire in his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of conversation, "I have just received a call no father should ever have to take. My daughters, ages 12 and 8, are currently on one of our aircraft, being discriminated against, humiliated, and physically intimidated by a member of the crew." The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned to him, the weight of his words landing like thunder. Marcus placed his phone flat on the table, speaker mode still active so he could keep Naomi close while speaking to his team. His tone was deliberate, each word sharp as a blade. "This is not just a customer service issue. This is not just a crew misconduct issue. This is discrimination. This is child abuse. And it happened on our aircraft." Gas circled the room. Patricia Owens, head of human resources, leaned forward, her face pale. "Sir, did you say physical contact?" Marcus's jaw clenched. "She grabbed my 8-year-old daughter's shoulder because she cried from hunger." The words hung heavy. No one dared speak. Marcus turned his gaze to his operations director. "I want this flight monitored immediately. Identify the crew member involved, pull every complaint on her file, cross-check passenger feedback, and mobilize crisis response. We will not allow this to go unpunished." Back in the cabin of Flight 2W7, Naomi pressed the phone to her ear, unaware of the storm her father was unleashing below. She focused only on his voice, letting his strength anchor her. "Naomi," he said softly now, the edge giving way to reassurance. "I want you to promise me something. Protect your sister. Stay calm. Do not be afraid. This ends tonight." Naomi wiped her tears quickly, not wanting Amara to see her cry. "I promise. Daddy." She slipped the phone back into her backpack, her heartbeat steadier now. She looked at her sister, who was still curled against her side, and whispered, "Daddy knows. He's going to fix it." Amara's eyes opened slowly. "Really?" she asked, her voice barely more than a squeak. "Really," Naomi said, her voice firm. "We're not alone. In the galley." Catherine Doyle continued her tirade to the junior attendant, her voice carrying down the aisle. Entitled passengers. Crying children. They think a first-class ticket means they can do whatever they want. Someone needs to put them in their place. But Catherine had no idea that her words, her actions, her very career were seconds away from unraveling. Justice was already in motion. The quiet hum of the engines filled the cabin, but beneath it, a different energy vibrated. It was the low murmur of passengers trading glances, whispering, and shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The silence that had once been filled with resignation was now turning into something stronger, something that Catherine Doyle could not control. Naomi sat taller, her hands still wrapped around her sister's. Amara leaned against her, exhausted, but soothed by the promise Naomi had whispered moments earlier. "Daddy knows. He's going to fix it." That sentence repeated in her mind like a shield against the cruelty she had endured. The passengers around them had reached a quiet breaking point. Evelyn Carter in row 3 angled her phone discreetly, recording yet again. She was no longer just an observer. She was a witness determined to capture every detail. Doctor. Laura Martinez remained perched at the edge of her seat, her sharp eyes tracking Catherine's every move like a hawk. And Robert Fields. The attorney in row 5 had taken out a small notebook, jotting down the time, the sequence of events, the names and details he overheard. It was Margaret Thompson, the elderly woman in 1B, who finally spoke into the uneasy silence. Her voice was trembling but resolute. "These children have been through enough. This should never have happened." She turned in her seat, facing the sisters. Her kind eyes softened as she looked at Amara. "Sweetheart, you've been so brave." The words seemed to ripple through the cabin. A schoolteacher from Phoenix, Michael Torres, added his voice. "I've been flying for 30 years. Never in my life have I seen children treated like this. Not once. And to see it in first class, where service is supposed to be equal and dignified, it makes me sick." Catherine, overhearing, spun on her heel from the galley. Her cheeks flushed crimson. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice rising above the murmurs. "I will not tolerate passengers interfering with crew authority. I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I know how to handle difficult passengers. Doctor." Martinez rose from her seat. She did not raise her voice, but her calm authority cut sharper than Catherine's anger. "What you have done tonight is not handling difficult passengers. It is targeting children. You denied them food. You humiliated them in front of everyone. And you put your hands on an 8-year-old girl. That is not authority. That is abuse." Gaffes echoed once more. Even those who had remained quiet were nodding now, their faces taut with outrage. Catherine's eyes darted across the cabin, searching for control that was slipping like sand through her fingers. "These passengers are conspiring," she said, her voice shrill. "They are misinterpreting what happened. Children often exaggerate. They are." But her words were cut short by Robert Fields, who stood firmly. "I am a civil rights attorney. I am not exaggerating, and neither are these children. I have been documenting everything. If you think your uniform shields you from accountability, you are mistaken. What you've done violates company policy, federal civil rights protections, and basic human decency." The silence that followed was deafening. Naomi squeezed Amara's hand, feeling the tremor of fear in her sister's small fingers. Yet for the first time that night, Naomi felt something shift. It was as though the weight she had carried alone was now being shared by the adults around her. The cabin had chosen a side, and it wasn't Catherine's. Meanwhile, in a skyscraper conference room miles away, Marcus Reed's phone buzzed as his operations director leaned across the table. "Sir, we've identified the flight attendant, Catherine Doyle, senior attendant, 15 years with the company. A handful of unsubstantiated complaints over the years, but nothing on record strong enough for termination." Marcus's jaw tightened. "That ends tonight," he said coldly. "She put her hands on my daughter. I want her employment history pulled, every detail, and I want security waiting at the gate in New York." Patricia Owens, head of HR, spoke cautiously. "Sir, if we remove her mid-journey, it could disrupt the service." Marcus's eyes snapped to her. "Patricia, my daughters are being discriminated against on one of our flights. This is not about service disruption. This is about protecting children, restoring dignity, and sending a message that no employee, no matter how long they've been here, is above accountability." The room went silent. Everyone knew Marcus Reed's reputation. He had built his empire not by compromise, but by conviction. When he declared action, action followed. Back in the sky, Catherine tried one last attempt to salvage authority. She strode back to the sisters' row, her heels clicking sharply against the cabin floor. "Girls," she said loudly, her tone dripping with mock patience, "I hope this has been a learning experience for you. Flying is a privilege. Respecting crew authority is part of that privilege. Next time, you'll remember to follow the rules." Naomi's stomach twisted. She wanted to scream, to tell this woman that her cruelty had nothing to do with rules, but before she could open her mouth, Amara looked up with wide, tear-streaked eyes. Her voice was small, fragile, but it carried through the silence. "Do you have kids?" she asked Catherine. Her words trembled, but her sincerity was piercing. "Would you want someone to be mean to them like you're being mean to us?" The cabin gasped collectively. Passengers leaned forward, their eyes locked on the scene. Evelyn's camera caught the moment with perfect clarity. For a brief second, Catherine faltered. Her lips parted as though she might soften. But then her pride hardened her face once more. "That is completely inappropriate," she snapped. "And it shows exactly the entitled attitude that got you into this situation." The gasp that followed was sharper, louder, filled with outrage. "Dr." Martinez shook her head in disbelief. Margaret Thompson's hand flew to her mouth. Michael Torres muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." Naomi's chest ached. She wanted to shield her sister from the sting of that dismissal. But Amara's innocent question had already cut through the cabin like a blade. Even the most silent passengers now wore faces of shock and fury. And at that very moment, while Catherine stood in the aisle fuming, the cockpit received a priority message. Captain Eric Donovan, a 20-year veteran pilot, straightened in his seat as the radio crackled. "Flight 227. This is New York Operations Control. You have executive-level instructions." He glanced at his first officer, who gave a sharp nod. "Go ahead." "Operations. Captain, be advised you have 2 minor passengers on board, seats 2A and 2B. They are the daughters of Marcus Reed. There are multiple reports of discriminatory behavior and inappropriate physical contact by Flight Attendant Catherine Doyle. Upon landing, security and supervisory staff will board the aircraft for immediate investigation and potential removal of the crew member." Captain Donovan's pulse quickened. He had heard Marcus Reed's name in hushed tones across the industry. The man was a titan, and his involvement meant this was no ordinary crew complaint. "Copy that," he said into the radio, his voice steady. "Full cooperation will be provided. He leaned back, exhaling. "Well," he murmured, "this is about to get interesting." Back in the cabin, the murmurs swelled. Passengers exchanged whispers, glances, nods of solidarity. Evelyn discreetly airdropped her video to those around her. Within minutes, the footage spread from device to device like wildfire. Some passengers began posting it on social media with captions that cut to the heart of the issue. Flight attendant denies black sister's food in first class. Grabs 8-year-old shoulder. Heartbreaking. Outrage on Flight 207. Witnessing blatant discrimination. Unacceptable. Naomi, unaware of the viral storm already building below, simply held her sister's hand tighter. Amara looked up at her, whispering, "Do you think people believe us now?" Naomi kissed her forehead softly. "Yes, Amara, they believe us." And for the first time since the ordeal began, the cabin no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a courtroom, with witnesses, evidence, and a truth too strong to be ignored. What Catherine didn't know, couldn't possibly imagine, was that her downfall was no longer in Naomi's trembling hands. It was now in the hands of every passenger who had chosen to stand with the sisters, in the hands of executives mobilizing on the ground, and in the steady voice of a father who would not rest until justice was served. Justice was already in the air, and it was coming for her. Catherine Doyle stood rigid in the aisle, her face flushed from the heat of confrontation. She had told herself she was simply maintaining order, but the faces staring back at her told a different story. No longer neutral, no longer silent. The passengers had chosen. Their eyes followed her like a jury that had already decided the verdict. She smoothed her uniform with quick, jittery motions and forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice pitched higher than usual, "I need everyone to understand that your safety and comfort remain my top priority. What you are witnessing is a misunderstanding. Children sometimes misinterpret situations." The words landed with a thud. Evelyn Carter's camera captured every syllable, and Laura Martinez's sharp glare cut through the performance. Naomi, watching quietly from her seat, felt her stomach twist. Her sister leaned into her, whispering softly, "She's lying." Naomi nodded and squeezed Amara's hand. She knew it too, but this time the difference was clear. They were not the only ones who knew it. Everyone did. Robert Fields, the attorney, spoke evenly but firmly. "This isn't a misunderstanding. I've seen it from start to finish. You deliberately skipped them during meal service. You belittled them when they asked politely, and you put your hands on that child." He pointed gently toward Amara, who shrank back into Naomi's side. "This is not an issue of perception. It is fact, and it is being documented." The air in the cabin tightened. Catherine's chest heaved as she searched for control. She had been through turbulence, medical emergencies, and disruptive passengers, but she had never faced a cabin united against her. Her mind raced. If she admitted fault, she feared she would lose everything. If she doubled down, maybe she could still salvage her authority. The thought churned with desperation. She straightened her shoulders. Passengers are not authorized to challenge crew authority. She snapped, "Interference is a federal offense." A ripple of murmurs spread through the rows. Michael Torres leaned forward. "And abusing children is worse," he said loudly. "You're hiding behind rules that don't apply to what you've done." Margaret Thompson's fragile but determined voice followed. "I have flown for 70 years. Never in my life have I seen such cruelty, especially toward children. If you believe rules, excuse that. You've already lost the trust of everyone here." Catherine's throat tightened. For a flicker of a moment, doubt pushed through her pride. Could she really be wrong? But then anger surged back, smothering the thought. At the front of the plane, Captain Eric Donovan received another coded message from operations. He scanned the paper slip that had just printed from the communications unit. His brows lifted. "It's confirmed," he murmured to his first officer. "The CEO himself is directing this case. Supervisors and security will be waiting at the gate. We are to maintain normal cabin operations but prepare for immediate crew interventions upon landing." The first officer let out a low whistle. "That's heavy." Captain Donovan nodded grimly. He knew what it meant. This wasn't just a personnel issue. This was about the reputation of an airline and the values of the man who ran it. Back in New York, Marcus Reed's boardroom had transformed into a command center. Screens lit up with real-time updates, passenger manifest, crew profiles, and even live social media feeds filled the room. The video Evelyn Carter had posted was already climbing in views. Within 20 minutes, it had been shared thousands of times. Hashtags calling for justice trended upward. Marcus stood at the center, phone still nearby, occasionally glancing at it as if to draw strength from the voice of his daughter he had heard not long ago. His team waited as he gave instructions. "When this plane lands, Catherine Doyle will be relieved of duty on the spot. She will not wear our uniform again. Every passenger who witnessed this will be offered formal interviews and follow-up. Transparency is not optional." His legal advisor shifted nervously. "Sir, if the press picks this up before we have an official statement," Marcus cut him off. "It's already with the press. Pretending otherwise is denial. We don't wait. We lead. Draft a statement acknowledging what happened and promising immediate accountability. And prepare a personal apology. Not corporate, personal. From me." His voice carried the same steel Naomi had heard when he promised her they were not alone. On the plane, the tension reached a tipping point. Catherine made her way back to the galley, her steps sharp, her head pounding. She muttered to the younger attendant, Jason, who looked pale and deeply uncomfortable. "Do you see what they're doing?" she hissed. "They're turning against us. They don't respect authority anymore." Jason swallowed hard. He had been quiet all night, but now his conscience screamed too loudly. "I saw what happened," he said quietly. "They weren't disruptive. They were polite. They asked for food like everyone else. And you." He hesitated, then forced himself to finish. "You went too far, Catherine." Her eyes widened. Betrayal cut through her like ice. "You're siding with them." "I'm siding with the truth," Jason whispered. "What you did was wrong." Catherine's chest burned. For the first time, she felt utterly alone. Naomi glanced back, catching fragments of their conversation. She leaned closer to her sister and whispered, "See people, know the truth." Amara nodded, her small face still pale but calmer. For the first time since the crackers had been shoved into their hands, hope flickered in her eyes. Passengers began murmuring louder. Phones glowed in the dimmed cabin. Messages, photos, videos all being shared in real time. The story was no longer confined to 30,000 feet. It was spreading across the world below. Evelyn leaned across the aisle to Naomi. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "people are already watching. The whole world is going to see what happened here. You've been so strong." Naomi blinked back tears. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that her sister's pain, her own fear, meant something beyond this cabin. At that very moment. Amara shifted in her seat. Her voice was soft, fragile, but clear enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I just want to go home. I just want Mommy." The cabin fell silent. The words pierced deeper than any argument or confrontation. They reminded every adult in earshot that these were not just passengers. They were children, far from home, caught in something they never should have faced. Robert Fields closed his notebook. His voice was calm but final. "This is over. Catherine, whether you admit it or not, your career ended the moment you laid a hand on that child. Now it's just a matter of formality." Catherine froze. A chill ran through her. For the first time, she understood that the passengers weren't just angry. They were witnesses. They were evidence. And they would not forget. The plane continued eastward, every mile carrying them closer to a reckoning Catherine could no longer escape. "In her seat," Naomi whispered to Amara, her own voice trembling but resolute. "We're almost through this. Daddy said we're not alone, and he was right. Look around. Everyone's with us now." Amara nestled closer, whispering. Promise. Naomi kissed her sister's hair. Promise. And as the plane cut through the night sky, justice gathered like a storm, waiting at the next gate. The seatbelt light chimed, its soft ding cutting through the tension that had wrapped the cabin for hours. Passengers straightened in their seats, trays clicked into place, and window shades were lifted for approach. Yet the usual calm of descent was nowhere to be found. The air inside the cabin was thick with anticipation. Naomi leaned toward the window, the lights of New York flickering faintly in the distance. Amara pressed against her side, holding her stuffed bear tightly, her small fingers digging into the fabric as if it were an anchor. Naomi whispered softly into her sister's ear. "Almost there. Amara, just hold on a little longer." The words were steady, but inside Naomi's chest, her heart raced. She had never felt time move so slowly. Every minute felt stretched, heavy with unspoken questions. Would her father really be there? Would the airline take this seriously? Or would Catherine somehow escape the consequences everyone had promised across the cabin? Evelyn Carter angled her phone again, recording the hush that fell as the plane began its descent. "Doctor?" Laura Martinez sat upright, her hands folded neatly in her lap, but her sharp eyes never left Catherine Doyle, who stood rigid in the galley. Robert Fields tapped his pen against his notebook, each click marking another moment of waiting. Catherine's confidence, once ironclad, now quivered beneath the surface. She smoothed her uniform again and again, her lips moving silently as if rehearsing. She pictured herself explaining to supervisors, justifying her choices as firm discipline. But even as she rehearsed, doubt gnawed at her. Passengers were against her. Evidence was everywhere. And she had heard Jason, the junior attendant, speak against her. She told herself she was the authority here. But the words felt hollow now. In the cockpit, Captain Eric Donovan received the latest communication from operations. His headset crackled as the message came through. "Captain, be advised upon arrival at Gate 17 Security and Senior Supervisor Maria Sanchez will board immediately. Do not release passengers until instructed. Situation is confirmed as executive-level priority." Donovan read it twice, then exchanged a glance with his first officer. "This is no routine complaint," he murmured. "This is about to be something people talk about for years." Back on the ground, Marcus Reed stood at the center of the Terminal Operations Office at JFK, his suit immaculate, his expression like carved stone. Screens in front of him displayed the flight path of Flight 227 now on final approach. Around him, supervisors, legal staff, and communications officers buzzed with controlled urgency. Maria Sanchez, his most trusted flight operations supervisor, adjusted her badge and looked directly at him. "Mr. Reed, as soon as the door opens, I'll take point. Security will follow my lead. We'll speak to the girls first, make sure they're safe and calm. Then we'll confront Catherine Doyle in front of the passengers. This needs to be transparent." Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. "Good. But remember, this isn't just about punishing one person. It's about proving to my daughters and to every passenger that this company will never tolerate abuse in our name." His voice softened slightly. "When you kneel to speak to them, make sure they know they are not in trouble. Make sure they feel safe again." Maria's eyes glistened. Of course, back in the sky, the cabin was a study in contrasts. The engines roared softly, carrying them lower, while the silence of passengers felt louder than any noise. Naomi stared at the seat in front of her, her thoughts tangled. She wanted to believe her father's power could fix everything. But another part of her wrestled with doubt. Would the world believe two black girls over a senior flight attendant? Her inner voice battled quietly. What if they dismiss it as exaggeration? What if Catherine convinces them it was just discipline? But then she felt Amara's small hand tugging at her arm. Her sister's eyes were red and puffy, but there was trust in them. Naomi swallowed hard, resolving that she couldn't crumble now. If not for herself, then for her sister. Across the aisle, Margaret Thompson leaned toward Naomi. Her voice was soft, grandmotherly. "You've been remarkable, dear. I want you to know that, no matter what happens when we land, you should be proud." Naomi blinked, her throat tightening. She whispered back, "Thank you." The final descent began. The city lights glowed brighter, sprawling like a sea of stars. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our approach into New York. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened. Seats are upright, and tray tables secured. We expect to be on the ground shortly." The words sounded ordinary, but everyone in first class knew this landing was anything but routine. Catherine braced herself in the galley, clinging to the thought that maybe, just maybe, she could still frame this as a misunderstanding. Yet her hands trembled. She noticed Jason staring at her from across the galley, his face pale but resolute. She snapped at him in a low voice. "Don't you dare undermine me in front of them!" Jason held her gaze, surprising himself with the steadiness of his tone. "I don't have to undermine you. You already did that yourself." Her stomach lurched harder than the descent. The wheels touched down with a jolt. Gasps and sighs filled the cabin as passengers braced against the landing. Naomi closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer of thanks. Amara clutched her stuffed bear tighter, whispering, "We're safe now." "Right." Naomi kissed the top of her sister's head. "Yes, we're safe now." But in her heart, she wasn't entirely sure. As the plane taxied toward Gate 17, passengers sat upright, their eyes darting between Catherine and the front of the plane. Phones were clutched tightly. Evelyn whispered to Robert Fields, "It's almost here." Robert nodded. "Justice doesn't always come quickly, but tonight it will. In the terminal." Marcus Reed watched the monitor as the plane aligned with the gate. His fists clenched at his sides, but his face remained calm. His daughters were only minutes away, and the woman who had humiliated them was about to face the consequences. The jet bridge rolled forward with a mechanical groan, connecting metal to metal. Inside the cabin, the seatbelt sign pinged off, but passengers stayed still, sensing something monumental was about to unfold. Catherine cleared her throat, attempting one last performance. "Ladies and gentlemen, "Thank you for your cooperation this evening," she said, her voice strained, but feigning control. "We appreciate your understanding as we resolve some minor matters." The door opened. Maria Sanchez stepped inside, flanked by 2 security officers. Her presence radiated authority without a word. She walked directly to row 2, where Naomi and Amara sat holding hands. She crouched to their eye level, her voice gentle and warm. "Hello, sweethearts. My name is Maria. I'm here to make sure you're okay. You did absolutely nothing wrong. You were perfect passengers. And I'm so sorry for everything you've been through tonight." Naomi's eyes widened. She glanced at Amara, who clutched her bear tighter, then looked back at Maria. "Are we in trouble?" Maria's expression softened, her heart aching at the question. "Oh, no, not at all. You are not in trouble. You are safe, and you are very, very brave." The cabin watched in silence, many with tears glistening in their eyes. Evelyn's phone recorded the moment, capturing the stark contrast between Catherine's coldness and Maria's compassion. Catherine stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Excuse me, Supervisor. I need to clarify Maria." Rose slowly, turning to face her. Her eyes were icy, her tone calm but cutting. "Ms. Doyle, we will discuss your actions in due time, but first, we address the children you harmed. Stand aside." The words hit Catherine harder than she expected. She froze, her authority evaporating in the face of Maria's command. Passengers exchanged glances, some nodding, others whispering under their breath. They knew they were about to witness something unforgettable. And for Naomi and Amara, the moment they had prayed for since the ordeal began was finally here. Someone with authority, someone with power, was standing on their side. Justice had just boarded Flight 227. The door of Flight 227 remained open, the scent of jet fuel mingling with the sterile chill of the terminal air seeping in. Passengers sat frozen, not in fear, but in anticipation. Everyone knew that the long arc of the flight's tension had arrived at its breaking point. Maria Sanchez stood firmly in the aisle, her posture radiating calm authority. The 2 security officers flanked her, their presence unmistakable but unobtrusive. They weren't here for passengers. Their eyes were locked on Catherine Doyle. Naomi held Amara close, whispering softly into her ear, "It's okay now. We're not alone anymore." Amara blinked up at Maria, her tiny voice asking, "Are you really here to help us?" Maria crouched again, her eyes level with the 8-year-old. "Yes, sweetheart. That is exactly why I'm here. You did nothing wrong. None of this was your fault." The reassurance sent a wave of emotion through the cabin. Margaret Thompson wiped her eyes. Evelyn Carter steadied her phone, making sure the moment was captured. Even Robert Fields, so precise and composed, swallowed hard before speaking. "Supervisor Sanchez," he said clearly, "I am an attorney and a passenger on this flight. I have documented the systematic discrimination carried out by Ms. Doyle against these 2 children. I am prepared to submit my testimony." Catherine's head snapped toward him, her voice sharp with panic. "This is a gross misrepresentation. They were disruptive. They were crying. They were demanding things." Her words were drowned out by Dr. Laura Martinez, who rose from her seat. "I am a pediatrician. I observed these girls for the entire flight. They were quiet, respectful, and patient. The only disruption was caused by Miss Doyle's refusal to treat them like human beings." Catherine's face flushed crimson. She tried again, her voice rising. "You don't understand. Crew authority is absolute in flight. If I say certain service is withheld, it is within my rights, Jason, the junior attendant, finally stepped forward. His voice shook at first, but steadied with each word. With respect. Ms. Doyle, that's not true. I was here. I saw it. They weren't disruptive. They asked politely. You ignored them, then humiliated them. And when the younger one cried because she was hungry, you grabbed her shoulder. His throat tightened, but he forced himself to finish. That wasn't authority. That was cruelty. The cabin erupted in murmurs of agreement. Catherine spun in place, her eyes wild, searching for support and finding none. Passenger after passenger spoke up. Michael Torres stood, his teacher's voice clear and firm. These girls reminded me of my own students. They behaved better than most adults I've taught. Your treatment of them was inexcusable. Margaret Thompson raised her fragile hand. I may be old, but my eyes are still sharp. I saw you pass them over again and again. I saw their faces when you mocked them. I will never forget it. Evelyn Carter lifted her phone high. The world already knows what happened. This isn't just our word. The video is online. Thousands have seen it. Millions will. Your actions are not hidden anymore. The silence that followed was suffocating. Catherine's breath came in shallow bursts. Her polished facade shattered. She turned desperately toward Maria. You have to understand. They challenged me. They made me look weak in front of the cabin. I was just trying to maintain order. Maria's eyes narrowed, her voice like steel. Order is not maintained by humiliating children. Discipline is not delivered through discrimination. And authority is not a shield for cruelty. She stepped closer, lowering her voice but ensuring every passenger could hear. You broke the trust placed in you. You broke the values of this company. And worst of all, you broke the spirit of two innocent children who simply wanted a meal and respect. Catherine's mouth opened, but no words came. Naomi felt Amara's grip tighten on her arm. For the first time, Naomi allowed herself to believe that justice was real. Maria turned to the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your courage in speaking up tonight. Your testimonies matter. Your voices matter. And they will ensure that what happened here will not be swept aside. She looked directly at Catherine. Ms. Doyle, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Please collect your belongings and prepare to be escorted from this aircraft. The gasp that followed was collective. Some passengers applauded softly. Others sat in stunned silence. But every single person felt the weight of the decision. Catherine's legs wobbled as she gripped the galley counter. 15 years of service collapsed around her in an instant. She stammered, I didn't know they were the CEO's daughters. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Maria's reply was cold, deliberate. That is exactly the problem. It should not matter who they are. It should not matter whose daughters they are. Every passenger deserves dignity. Every child deserves kindness. And tonight, you gave them neither. The cabin broke into applause, louder this time, stronger, not celebratory of Catherine's downfall, but of the validation given to Naomi and Amara. Tears welled in Naomi's eyes. She pressed her cheek against her sister's hair. Amara whispered, She's not going to hurt us anymore. Is she? No, Naomi whispered back, her voice firm for the first time that night. She's not. Catherine's eyes darted from face to face, pleading silently for anyone to defend her. None did. Even Jason refused to meet her gaze. Her career, her authority, her identity as a senior attendant, all of it lay in ruins, undone by her own choices. Security stepped forward. Officer Walsh spoke firmly, but without malice. "Ma'am, please gather your personal items. You'll be escorted off this aircraft." Catherine reached for her bag with trembling hands. Before she turned, Amara's small voice carried through the cabin. It was not angry. It was not vengeful. It was heartbreakingly gentle. "I hope someday you learn to be nice," Amara said. "Maybe you're just sad inside, but I hope you stop making other people sad too." The words pierced deeper than any reprimand. Catherine froze, the innocence in the child's voice cutting through her armor. For the first time that night, her eyes filled with tears. Maria placed a steady hand on Naomi's shoulder. "You and your sister are safe now. You've been incredibly brave." She straightened and signaled to the officers. "Escort her out." As Catherine was led down the aisle, passengers turned their heads, some shaking in disgust, others capturing the moment on their phones. The clap started softly again, this time from Michael Torres, then spread until the entire cabin echoed with applause. Not for the removal of Catherine Doyle, but for the resilience of two young girls who had endured cruelty with grace. Captain Donovan stepped from the cockpit, his voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of our crew and our company, I want to apologize for what you've witnessed tonight. This behavior does not represent who we are or what we stand for. And to our young passengers in 2A and 2B, Naomi and Amara, you have shown more dignity and composure than anyone could have asked. Your family must be incredibly proud." Naomi felt her cheeks flush, but in her heart, she knew those words belonged to her father. As Catherine disappeared through the aircraft door, Maria turned back to the passengers. "We will speak more after disembarkation. For now, please know this what happened tonight will not be forgotten. Not by me, not by the company, and certainly not by the man who leads it." Naomi's chest tightened with emotion. She realized then that her father's promise was true. Justice had not only come, it had arrived in front of everyone, undeniable and absolute. The cabin exhaled as one, relief, vindication, and a shared understanding that they had witnessed something historic. For Naomi and Amara, the night had begun with humiliation, but it was ending with a lesson the world would carry forward. Respect was not optional. Dignity was not negotiable, and no amount of authority could ever erase the truth. The wheels of Flight 227 had barely kissed the jet bridge when a hush fell across the cabin. Passengers shifted in their seats, gathering their belongings, but unwilling to move. No one wanted to miss what would happen next. They had just witnessed the extraordinary, and the sense of unfinished business lingered like static in the air. Naomi held Amara's hand tightly, her knuckles white, her body buzzing with the release of fear. She whispered into her sister's hair, "It's almost over. We just have to get off the plane." Amara blinked at her, her stuffed bear pressed against her chest. "Will Daddy be there?" she asked. Naomi's voice cracked as she answered, "Yes, he promised." Maria Sanchez stood at the front of the cabin, her presence commanding but reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience," she said in a steady voice. "Please remain seated until instructed. We'll begin deplaning shortly." She glanced at Naomi and Amara, her gaze softening. "You two will come with me first." Catherine Doyle had already been escorted off by security. Her absence was like a vacuum, but the residue of her cruelty still clung to the cabin. Jason, the junior attendant, moved quietly through the aisle, refilling water cups for those who wanted it, his demeanor careful, almost penitent. He paused by Naomi and Amara, bending down slightly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. His voice carried shame, but also sincerity. Naomi gave a small nod. She could see he was young, scared, caught between right and wrong. But she wasn't ready to offer him forgiveness. Not yet. The door to the jet bridge opened wider, and a tall figure appeared. Marcus Reed stepped inside, flanked by 2 airline executives and security. He was immaculately dressed, his presence so commanding that the cabin seemed to hold its breath. His eyes scanned the passengers quickly before landing on his daughters. Naomi's composure, which had held so tightly through the ordeal, crumbled the moment she saw him. "Daddy," she cried, her voice breaking as she stood and threw herself into his arms. Amara followed, clinging to his waist, her small frame trembling. Marcus wrapped them both in his arms, his lips pressing to the top of Naomi's hair, his hand resting protectively on Amara's back. His eyes, dark with restrained fury, lifted to Maria. "Thank you," he said quietly, but his voice carried weight. "You did right by them." Maria inclined her head. "They were extraordinary," she said, her tone almost reverent. "Stronger than many adults I've seen in situations like this." Passengers sat in silence, some openly weeping at the reunion. Evelyn Carter discreetly lowered her phone, unwilling to intrude on the private tenderness of the moment. Margaret Thompson dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, whispering, "That's how a father should be." Marcus knelt to his daughter's level, brushing tears from their cheeks. "You did everything right," he said firmly. "I am so proud of you. You showed grace when others showed cruelty. You showed strength when others tried to make you small. And now, everyone will know the truth." Naomi's tears streamed freely. "She was so mean to us. Daddy, she said we didn't belong here. She gave us crackers when everyone else had real food. And she grabbed Amara." Marcus's jaw tightened. He kissed his younger daughter's forehead, then stood, turning to Maria in the cabin. His voice shifted into the tone that had built an empire. Calm, commanding, impossible to ignore. "I want to thank all of you who spoke up tonight," he said to the passengers. "You could have stayed silent. You could have looked away, but you didn't. You defended 2 innocent children when they needed it most. That matters more than you know." Robert Fields cleared his throat. "Mr. Reed, you don't need to thank us. What we witnessed was wrong. It was our duty to say so." Marcus nodded once, acknowledging the words with deep respect. It should not take courage to expect dignity, and yet, tonight, it did. "I will make sure that what happened here never happens again." His eyes shifted briefly to Jason, who stood near the galley with his head bowed. "And for those of you who hesitated," Marcus continued, "let this be a reminder. Silence, too, has consequences. If you see injustice and do nothing, you allow it to grow." Jason's shoulders slumped further. He whispered, almost inaudible, "I know." Maria stepped in, addressing the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Reed will handle the broader matters from here. For now, please know that every witness statement, every piece of footage you've captured tonight, will be formally recorded. Your voices will be heard." Passengers nodded in solemn agreement. Some had already uploaded videos. Others promised to submit written accounts. The cabin, once fractured by discrimination, had become unified in solidarity. Marcus guided Naomi and Amara toward the exit, but Naomi paused. She turned back, her eyes scanning the passengers. "Thank you," she said, her young voice trembling but resolute. "Thank you for believing us." The cabin erupted in applause, not the polite kind, but a thunderous, cathartic release. Naomi's cheeks flushed, But this time it wasn't from shame. It was from pride. The jet bridge stretched ahead, lined with uniformed staff and executives. As the trio walked down, whispers followed them. Marcus kept his daughters close, his stride purposeful. Amara looked up at him, still clutching her bear. "Are we really safe now?" she asked again. Marcus's voice softened, but the steel beneath remained. "Yes, sweetheart, you are safe, and soon. Every child on every one of my flights will be safe too." Behind them, Maria watched with a heavy heart. She thought of her own children, of the time she had trusted strangers to treat them kindly. Tonight had shown her how easily that trust could be broken, but also how powerfully it could be restored. Outside the gate, a small crowd had already gathered. Airport staff, journalists who had caught wind of the unfolding scandal, and a handful of passengers from coach who had heard rumors all pressed forward. The atmosphere buzzed with questions, cameras flashing. Marcus shielded his daughters as security created space. "No questions tonight," he said firmly to the press. "This is about my children. Tomorrow, we will address everything else. Tonight, they go home." Reporters shouted, "Mr. Reed, will the flight attendant be arrested? What changes will the airline make?" But Marcus ignored them, guiding his daughters through the throng. Back inside the gate area, Maria called for a team to escort the remaining passengers out in an orderly fashion. Evelyn lingered, pulling Maria aside. "I've already posted the video," she confessed. "It's spreading fast. People are outraged. By morning, it'll be everywhere." Maria sighed, but she didn't look surprised. "Good," she said. "Let the world see what happens when dignity is denied. Let them see the consequences." In a quiet lounge away from the chaos, Marcus sat with his daughters, finally allowing himself to exhale. Naomi leaned against him. Amara curled in his lap. He stroked their hair slowly, his voice low. "I built this airline to protect people, to make sure no one felt what I once felt when I was treated as less than human. Tonight, one of our own betrayed that mission. But tonight also proved why we fight, because dignity is not a luxury. It is a right." Naomi looked up at him, her eyes red but fierce. "Will she ever work here again?" Marcus shook his head. "No, not here, not anywhere. And tomorrow, the world will know why," Amara whispered. "I still don't understand why she didn't like us." Marcus's throat tightened. He kissed the top of her head. "Sometimes people carry darkness inside them. They let it blind them to others' light. But your light, both of you, is stronger than her darkness. Don't ever let anyone make you doubt that." The girls clung to him, and for the first time since the ordeal began, the storm within Naomi eased. Justice had not fully unfolded yet, but she could feel it beginning. And she knew they were no longer just victims of cruelty. They were the spark of change. By dawn the next morning, Flight 227 was no longer just a flight number. It had become a headline. Clips from Evelyn Carter's phone rippled across platforms with a velocity that stunned even veteran journalists. Hashtags blazed: "More justice for Naomi and Amara," "Airline accountability," "Dignity in the skies." The sight of two little girls clutching cracker packs while adults dined on salmon and tenderloin hit the world like a punch to the chest. And the moment Amara's small voice asked Catherine Doyle if she had children of her own became the most replayed clip of the day. Inside his penthouse suite overlooking the city, Marcus Reed stood at the window with his phone pressed to his ear. His daughters were still asleep in the next room, exhaustion finally overpowering the anxiety of the night. Marcus's tone was calm, but absolute. "We will not wait for this storm to pass. We will set the terms of this storm. On the other end of the line, Patricia Gomez, the airline's head of communications, scribbled notes frantically. Mr. Reed, the networks are requesting statements. CNN, NBC, even BBC has reached out. The footage is dominating every major outlet. We need a unified message. You'll have one, Marcus replied. But it won't come from you. It will come from me. Schedule a press conference for 2 p.m. I want every network, every journalist, every employee who can be spared. This will not be damage control. This will be a declaration. Patricia hesitated. Sir, are you sure? Once you step in front of those cameras, this is more than a scandal. It becomes your personal story. Marcus turned from the window, his eyes dark but unwavering. It already is my personal story. Those children are my daughters. In the boardroom of the airline's Chicago headquarters, executives sat stiffly around the polished mahogany table. Some were bleary-eyed from sleepless nights, others tense from anticipation. When Marcus entered, the air shifted instantly. Conversation ceased, eyes lowered. He placed a tablet on the table and pressed play. Catherine Doyle appeared on screen, skipping the girls during meal service, serving them crackers, mocking them loudly. Then came the moment she gripped Amara's shoulder, telling her to stop crying. Gas rippled through the room, even though most had already seen it. Marcus let the silence stretch before speaking. This is not just misconduct. This is not just discrimination. This is child abuse broadcast to millions. And it happened under our brand, in our uniform, in our cabin. An operations manager cleared his throat. Mr. Reed, Ms. Doyle has already been terminated. Security escorted her from the aircraft. We've placed her on an industry ban. Perhaps with a strong apology, and Marcus's gaze sliced through the man's words. A strong apology. Is that what you would tell my daughters? That an apology erases humiliation? That an apology feeds a hungry child? No. We are beyond apologies. The room went still. Marcus leaned forward. We are rewriting policy. Effective immediately. There will be zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior. Any verified incident, any documented evidence, will result in termination. No exceptions, no appeals. Second, we are launching a comprehensive review of all historical complaints. I want names. I want patterns. If there are others like Doyle, they will not remain hidden. Patricia Gomez raised her hand carefully. Mr. Reed, the unions will push back. They'll argue due process. Marcus nodded once. They'll argue. Let them. They will not win. The public will not allow them to win. Not when they've seen what the world has seen. At the far end of the table, Robert Fields adjusted his glasses. He had been invited not only as a passenger witness, but also as a civil rights attorney with a national credibility. Mr. Reed, he began, what you are proposing is bold, but it must be paired with training and prevention. If you only punish without educating, the rot will regrow. Marcus inclined his head. Agreed. That is why we will invest in mandatory equity and empathy training for all employees, and not the kind that can be clicked through in an online module. Real, interactive training designed to break bias at the root. Designed by experts who know what discrimination looks like in practice. The executives murmured, some with relief, others with trepidation. Marcus pressed on. Finally, we will create something larger than this company. The Reed Foundation for Dignity in Aviation. $10 million. Effective today. It will fund research, education, and advocacy to ensure no passenger, especially no child, ever experiences what Naomi and Amara endured. The weight of the announcement silenced even the skeptics. One by one, heads began to nod. Later that afternoon, the press conference hall filled beyond capacity. Cameras lined the back wall, microphones crowded the podium, and the murmur of voices swelled like an approaching storm. When Marcus stepped up to the microphone, the room stilled. He began not as a CEO, but as a father. Last night, my daughters, Naomi and Amara, boarded Flight 227 as paying passengers. They were 8 and 12 years old. They carried their boarding passes like every other traveler. And yet, they were treated as if they were invisible. Worse than invisible, treated as less than human. The crowd leaned in. Marcus's voice was steady, but emotion rippled beneath. They were denied meals while everyone around them ate. They were mocked in front of strangers. And when one of them cried from hunger, a flight attendant placed her hand on my child's shoulder, not in comfort, but in cruelty. Gasps moved through the hall. Marcus let the silence hang before continuing. My daughters did nothing wrong. They were polite. They were patient. They were children. The failure was not theirs. It was ours. Mine. As the man who leads this company. Ours. As an industry that has too often excused bias under the veil of authority. That ends today. He outlined the new policies, the zero-tolerance standard, the historic review, the training overhaul, and the foundation. Cameras flashed. Pens scribbled. Reporters whispered urgently into microphones. But Marcus's words pierced louder than the noise. This is not about my daughters alone. This is about every passenger who has ever been told they don't belong. Every child who has ever been made to feel small. Every traveler who has ever wondered if the color of their skin would determine the service they received. To them, I say this no more. Not on my airline. Not in my skies. Thunderous applause erupted. Even the journalists clapped, their objectivity momentarily overtaken by the gravity of the moment. Back at home, Naomi and Amara watched the broadcast curled up on the couch with their grandmother. Naomi whispered, "That's Daddy." Amara leaned closer, her eyes wide. "He's fighting for us." Their grandmother smiled through tears. "He's fighting for everyone." When the press conference ended, Marcus stepped away from the podium, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. He knew the fight ahead would be fierce unions, lawsuits, political scrutiny, but he also knew he had shifted the ground. What happened on Flight 227 would not fade into obscurity. It would become a case study. A turning point. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Marcus returned home. His daughters ran to him again, their arms tight around his waist. Naomi looked up at him, her eyes still searching. "Daddy, will people really change?" Marcus bent down, holding both their faces in his hands. "People don't change overnight, but they do change when someone refuses to let them stay the same. And that's what we're doing. We're refusing to let the world stay the same." Amara smiled faintly, her innocence flickering back. "Then maybe the skies will be nicer now." Marcus pulled them close. "Yes, sweetheart, the skies will be nicer. Because of you." The storm outside the airline had begun to quiet, but the storm within Naomi and Amara lingered. Even after the press conferences, even after Catherine Doyle's name was scrubbed from company rosters and her uniform revoked, the sisters still carried the weight of what had happened at 30,000 feet. Trauma is never erased with headlines. It settles quietly, demanding patience and healing. At home, Marcus Reed moved deliberately between his dual roles. He was the CEO who had stared down a scandal and transformed it into reform. But he was also a father who tucked his daughters into bed, checked on their breathing in the night, and whispered reminders that they belonged everywhere. One evening, a week after Flight 227, Naomi sat at the kitchen table with her homework untouched. Her pencil tapped nervously against the paper. "Daddy," she said suddenly, "what if it happens again? Not to us, but to someone else. What if another kid is sitting in first class and someone decides they don't belong?" Marcus set down his coffee mug, his eyes softening. He sat across from her. "That's why we changed the rules," he explained. "That's why we made sure everyone knows there are consequences now." "But rules don't stop everyone," Naomi pressed, her 12-year-old mind both sharp and weary. What if people still think the way she thought? Marcus reached across the table, taking her hand. "Then we keep fighting. Change isn't one decision, Naomi. It's 1,000 decisions, made again and again, until the people who think that way realize they can't win." Amara padded into the kitchen in her socks, clutching her bear. "But we won, right?" she asked sleepily. Marcus smiled and lifted her onto his lap. "Yes, sweetheart. You won by being brave. You won by not letting her words change who you are." Across the country, the story of Flight 227 continued to ripple. Universities taught it in ethics classes. Civil rights organizations cited it in reports on systemic bias. Other airlines scrambled to announce their own reforms, eager to avoid becoming the next headline. The phrase "cracker box flight" became shorthand for blatant inequality in the skies. Inside Meridian Airlines, Maria Sanchez oversaw the rollout of new training programs. Employees sat in small groups, watching clips of the incident, discussing bias not as an abstract concept, but as something their own uniforms had been used to enforce. Jason, the young attendant, volunteered to speak first. His voice trembled as he admitted, "I froze. I thought if I kept my head down, it would pass. But silence was part of the harm. I won't make that mistake again." Maria nodded, her voice steady. "That is the lesson. Silence is a choice. And from this day forward, choosing silence will not protect you. It will implicate you." Passengers from Flight 227 also stayed in touch. Evelyn Carter, who had filmed the first viral clip, became an advocate for passenger rights, her post drawing thousands into a community dedicated to exposing in-flight discrimination. Dr. Martinez wrote an op-ed for a major newspaper titled "Children Deserve Better at 30,000 Feet," reminding readers that dignity was not optional. Robert Fields worked alongside Marcus to draft a policy framework that regulators in Washington soon began to study. But perhaps the most powerful voices remained those of Naomi and Amara. They were invited to speak at a youth leadership summit months later, standing side by side on stage. Naomi spoke first. Her voice was clear, no longer trembling. "We didn't ask to become a story. We just wanted dinner, like everyone else. But sometimes the world makes you into a story, and you have to decide what kind of story you want it to be." Amara, smaller but no less fierce, added softly, "I just wanted water, and I wanted someone to be kind. So now I want to be the kind person someone else might need." The audience rose to its feet, the ovation thunderous. The sisters had endured humiliation, but they emerged as symbols of resilience. Back in their quiet home, Marcus watched the clip of their speech on his laptop, his heart swelling. He had fought battles in boardrooms, but this was the legacy he cherished most. His daughters had taken pain and turned it into purpose. Later that night, Naomi stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. She thought about that night on Flight 227, the taste of stale crackers, the burn of tears she tried to hide, the weight of her sister's hand in hers. She thought about Catherine Doyle's cold eyes, but she also thought about Maria's warm apology. Evelyn's steady filming. Dr. Martinez's unwavering defense. "Daddy," she said as Marcus joined her by the window, "do you think Mrs. Doyle is sorry?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "I don't know, but I hope she is, because forgiveness is for those who understand what they've done." Naomi nodded. "I don't hate her. I just hope she learns." Marcus wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "That's strength. Naomi, not letting hate take root. That's how we heal. And that's how we keep changing things." In that quiet moment, father and daughter looked out at the night sky together. The planes blinked like stars against the dark, carrying strangers with stories of their own. The world had not been fixed overnight. Injustice still lurked, and bias still flew under different uniforms. But because of two little girls on Flight 227, the skies were not the same. They were watched more closely, questioned more deeply, held to a higher standard. For Naomi and Amara, the scars would fade, but never fully disappear. Yet those scars became reminders, etched into their young hearts, that they had not only survived cruelty, but had transformed it into something larger. A warning, a lesson, a call to action. And for Marcus Reed, the story of Flight 227 became more than a scandal managed, more than reforms implemented. It became the moment when his daughters taught him anew what he had always believed, that dignity is not a gift given by authority, but a birthright carried by every human being. As the sun rose on another day, Marcus prepared to step once again into his office, into meetings, into negotiations. Naomi and Amara prepared for school, their backpacks slung over their shoulders. Life moved forward, but different now, stronger, brighter. On the kitchen counter sat a single note Naomi had written in her neat, careful handwriting. "We belong everywhere, always." Marcus smiled when he read it, his chest tightening with pride. Yes, he thought, they did, and so did every passenger, on every flight, forever after. Two sisters, Naomi and Amara, boarded Flight 227 as children excited for a journey. They left as symbols of dignity and resilience. What should have been a simple meal in the sky became a public reckoning with prejudice, a reminder that injustice can appear anywhere, even in a cabin lined with luxury. But what do we remember most? Not the cruelty of one attendant, but the quiet strength of two children who never stopped believing in their worth. Not just the outrage of passengers, but the solidarity that rose when strangers refused to stay silent. And not only the humiliation, but the transformation that followed policies rewritten, accountability demanded, and the skies made safer for every traveler after them. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, what would you have done if you were there? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have stood up for what was right? Because justice in the sky is not only about laws and policies, it's about people like us refusing to accept anything less than dignity for all. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that reveal truth, challenge injustice, and uplift humanity.